And I think we're live.
Maybe you are.
Yeah, don't accuse anyone else of that, right?
Right.
I'll need a little more coffee.
That's funny. So welcome. It says it's not.
Yeah, I just posted. We have 10 people now live.
It's saying the Facebook feed's not working. We'll just take it off of Facebook then. All right. There. All right. So we're live. We've got a bunch of people watching. Welcome, everybody. I don't think we had a set agenda for this. I know the four of us, we're going to get together, talk a little bit about this thing that is finally out into the world. We're seeing it show up on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, which is nice. But other than that, this could be a quick one. This could be an hour. We'll see how it goes. If there are any questions, leave them in the chat feature of whichever platform you're on, and they'll get to us, and we'll put them up here. First question that came in, has the event started yet? Yes, we're started. We're going. So welcome. So, we've done a lot of discussions and panels now about the book. Lots of questions have been asked. Everyone wants to know, how do four people get together and write a book? I'm just going to say very carefully. But we're all still talking and we're all still friendly. So I think it all worked out.
I remember we talked about that, and that was the one thing that we had solid was the ideas, like the principles and the ideas, because I've been in conversation with Kurt about some other content, and that was like a big stopper because we didn't have the same ideas about a topic with someone. So that's a much longer process. Wouldn't you say, Kurt?
Yeah, I think the other thing that was, it's always helpful to have a layout of the chapters and what topics you want to cover in each chapter, and have that. And with four of us, had that discussion beforehand. And I've seen authors make fairly big mistakes where they don't have that. They just sort of start into chapter one and they don't really know what chapter 2, 3, 4, etc. are going to look like, and they write themselves into a corner. And with four of us, we couldn't afford that. The other thing that was, we've talked about this before, is that we did this pretty quickly. I mean, basically in about 5 to 6 months. We started in January, and we were mostly done in May, by the end of May. A little bit of wrap up in June, and that's impressive for four people to collaborate on a book. So I think we did a good job with that. And I think it was because we had the ideas worked out and the chapter structure worked out.
Yeah, sometimes a little bit of planning and alignment on principles can go a long way.
And that's the thing, is a little bit. So, we didn't have details and things, we got into chapters, and I remember at the beginning of each chapter when we would actually start work on it, it was like a sprint plan. And, we'd sit down and say, okay, so what did we really mean about this chapter? And we'd sometimes tear it apart a little bit and move things around. So, it was not big planning up front, but it was not no planning up front.
Would you say that we had the architectural runway? That was a little bit of a jab at.
Get out.
Oh my. I'm going to drink more coffee.
Nice. Well, and Trish, you were
people would appreciate that.
You were on double duty, right?
I was on double duty.
So you were actually, a facilitation book's coming out next month, right?
I think it's out.
Is it out?
I don't know. Somebody was sending me a picture of it. It's an orange book. The picture that I've sent out, and it's facilitating for professional Scrum teams, and that was a different experience, but also I was on double duty, and that was interesting too, because we had the same conversation. So our ideas are similar, in terms of how we were approaching the notion of facilitation, conflict, interactions, the research that we've done and been looking at. But there was that question, like, are we too similar? Are our ideas too much in a vacuum? So we had to actually get that out first. And so that dynamic was cool, because there was myself, Claudia Califano, and then David Spinks would challenge some of the ideas, and we just very respectful about it. And that was cool.
Yeah, I was trying to think through. So through the entire writing of Unlocking Business Agility, I don't think there was ever like a serious dust up. There was never like, I don't think anyone had to like put a stake in the ground and say, I won't bend on this, which was surprising with 4 highly opinionated people working on a book together. You know, all 4 of us are very like direct and very clear about what we believe and think. And I don't think there was ever a time where it was like, no, this is how it's going to be, or no one had their foot stamped down, and which is, I think, kind of interesting and odd and also really good. Or am I forgetting something?
I mean, I think we know better than to. So Kurt and I have written a book before, and we do a lot of content writing. And obviously, me, Ryan, and Todd, we've interacted a lot in building classes and all that other stuff. I think we know better than to be like, that sucks. Like, if you don't have a better idea, or if you don't have a frame to back up what you're saying, usually that's thought out, I think, by the 4 of us.
I think that to some degree, it's like, in a sense, a successful Scrum team. A lot of its success depends on that early team formation and having the right people on the team. So we had, I think, a nice complementarity of skills and viewpoints. So, I tend to be focused more on, in a sense, theory and, how the ideas fit together. I think, Ryan, you and Todd have a huge depth of experience from your consulting work. And Trish has a lot of experience from running workshops and interacting with people in the Scrum community around this. And so that blend of different perspectives really helped. If this had been a pure theory book, it would have been very short and would have been really dry and not really maybe very interesting. If it had been all just stories from the trenches, it would have been interesting and entertaining, but it wouldn't have had the ideas to really tie them together in a cohesive way. So, I think we each brought to the writing process some unique perspectives that really helped us make a better book together. And it was fun. It was fun, trying to, well, I remember one of the things that I found fun was that, first we talk about a real client, and then we would have to come up with some name.
Yeah. I was going to say there was what I will call an argument, and that was Kurt and I trying to decide the name of the brewery. I think we landed on Old Foam. I remember it wasn't an argument at all. It was just like going back and forth in comments. Kurt would be like, I don't like that. And I'm like, I don't like that. And then we landed on Old Foam. We're like, that's the ticket.
Which is really funny because I don't drink beer, so why I would have.
I remember you saying that exact thing.
And Todd does.
Something wrong with that.
I have a question for you guys, because I was getting asked this. So, well, actually, a couple questions. So one is, who do you want to read this book?
Because
we know people who are reading the book, they're drinking the juice. Like, who do you want?
This is going to sound really corny and stupid, but I truly mean this. I want Ken to read it and be proud of us. That would be
good thing he did read the book.
That was when you're putting something together like this and you're basing a book on someone else's work. I think first and foremost, you want them to read it and say, well done. You've represented it correctly. I think that was important to all of us as we're working through, because it's started with Ken, and the two of you have, Trish and Kurt have carried that torch and worked through a lot of issues on EBM with him. And so, yeah, I would say I know his forward was we didn't get to see it before everything was published, and so it was awesome to read that. But I think that was the reader I was most interested in.
I think for me, since there was a long period of silence, I guess I'll talk a little today. It's Friday. I think any leader or manager in any office environment, not just software, I really think that this is beyond agile. I like to classify and say that EBM is not an agile framework. It can be. It's beyond that. I think you can use it way outside of software. You can use it in your own personal objectives. You could use it to run a data analytics department, to look at the lens of how your department's doing in a mental health facility. I think that any leader or manager in the office environment, obviously, I think there's a sway in and a connection here to folks using Scrum. It's a Scrum.org book, but my draw would be that it's not limited just to that.
Yeah, and not and specifically not just software. We had a discussion yesterday with some folks, and the early iterations of EBM were very software oriented, and we've specifically generalized it from that. And during the writing process, Todd, you were really a strong advocate for making sure that it could be applied by and read by people who were not in software. And so that was a good test for us to try to get us out of our usual mindset, because I come from a software background, and I know Todd and Ryan too also come from that. And we also in the community, we often are talking about software issues, but this is a more general framework. And I think it was really useful to have that constant, really kind of question to say, is this still readable? And I think, Todd, you said you had your wife, who is not in software, read it, and also some other people read it, and it was still understandable and useful to them. And that was a really good forcing function for us, I think.
I was guest teaching last night for university, and there for grad students, professionals, and there was a woman who not in the software space, and she appreciated the ideas because she said, we are trying to change a strategy that has existed for over 400 years. How do you do that? And I was telling Todd, I said, run. And then I said, well, this notion that for us is, we're not really that interested. It's informative, but interested when you're talking about strategy, what happened in the past, look forward, right? And that's what EBM is that mindset of how do you start to do that and with the goal. So that was interesting. But just in terms of non-software, Todd and I have been talking a lot about how EBM applies to fitness, his own path in fitness, and some of the gyms you've been at.
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle, and I think that we've kind of dug like deep into it just out of intellectual curiosity. If you look at something like ability to innovate in a gym, that could be injury, right? And I was thinking the other day.
But even in a person, Todd, like that, yeah. If a person is one little product.
Yeah, 100%. And then when I think of time to market in that context, I think of almost like time to learn. Like, are you putting in the work to see the results, right? So.
Yeah, we have some nice comments in here. Just joined, but wanted to shout out y'all for a great book. Can't put it down. 2 more chapters to go. So thank you for that, our friend over on LinkedIn. Kurt, there's a question for you in the chat. So Supergirls wants to know if you're the one who chose the book cover, because it looks very similar, suspiciously similar to another one of your books, The Professional Agile Leader. with a little LOL after it.
Yeah. So there's a graphic, in a sense, a common theme across all the books in the Scrum.org book series. And so when the graphic designers get together and they propose something, it has to have kind of a circular orientation, something at the center, other things around it. I think the professional agile leader had like a DNA helix on the center, and then other things around it. This one had a light bulb, but that design language was kind of created at the beginning of the book series, and we have to stick to it. So we did have some ideas of our own that deviated from that, but the publisher wanted to have consistency.
I think we can say this, right? We wanted the book to be called The Watermelon Organization, and we wanted the book to look like a watermelon.
That's true. That was an early idea.
And that didn't work. For them.
And for those of you who don't know what the Watermelon Organization is, or the Watermelon Project, it's green on the outside, red on the inside. So that doesn't it's clever, but the metaphor wasn't applicable for much more than just that one. It was like a one joke kind of metaphor. So but the covers are interesting, and in trying to come up with something that, in a sense, distills the essence of your book without getting overly busy is difficult. So I'm happy with the covers, but yes, they do start to look the same, and they're not as bad as some book series I've worked on in the past, where it was the title and some stripes, common stripes, and that was it. So they literally all did look the same.
I think it looks good. I think it turned out pretty well.
Yeah.
I like it. And what's neat is, I mean, the publisher, I think we can say a little bit about how that works. They gave us options. Like, they mocked up a bunch of different ideas. They took a little bit of our input, and I think we ended up with pretty much what we wanted, right?
Yeah. I mean, you get maybe 5 choices, and you could veto and say, no, let's go back to the drawing board. But
yeah,
like a lot of things, is it good enough for what we want to achieve? Yeah. So I think especially on something like the cover, you can overthink it and end up with something not as good.
So a regular to our YouTube channel has ordered the book today. We appreciate it. I'm going to spend my nickel wisely. I am not sure what everyone else is going to do, but thanks for buying the book.
I really like this question here, Ryan. What are your ideas about using metrics, EBM, and making sure the success of agile transformation is more tangible?
Well, I think that's read the book. That's the whole ball of wax.
I've long thought of this. How do you know agile is working? Is a really, really interesting question. I mean, even if you want to go even lower than that, after some kind of this, first of all, the 4 of us I'll talk for us if you disagree with me, but I think the 4 of us universally agree that the notion of a transformation is a false notion.
It's ridiculous.
Because a transformation implies that there's an endpoint. I think, Ryan, you and I were just talking about this yesterday. It implies that you will achieve something at the end. I think of like a cocoon and a butterfly, right? You're transformed. When really it is just being okay with learning how to make explicit, objective transparency and making decisions constantly and evolving. I think that a lot of organizations have viewed a transformation as we have 30 Scrum teams now and we've transformed ourselves.
Todd, something that our conversation yesterday sparked in me was that it's kind of like, I look at it as a diet versus a lifestyle change, right? It's easy you can crash diet. You can, drop 30, 40 pounds in 3 or 4 months with an insane, low calorie intake and high exercise and that. But then as soon as you hit your target weight and you go back to your old lifestyle, what happens? The weight goes back on and you crash. I think that is what all of these big companies are doing. It's crash diets instead of actually transforming, and transforming is a bad word for it, but actually changing mindset and decisions and behaviors,
Yeah,
and maintaining it.
That's an interesting example because you could just be measuring your weight.
Yeah.
And that could just be a false measurement. So like, I like the idea of metrics, this person asked about metrics. However, what are the ultimate goals of it? Right. So center in there. And once we start asking organizations that's like almost like measurements seem to be an easy thing. When you start asking about goals, it's like flicking the ears, and people, you can get in some really, really interesting discussions when you start talking to people about their goals. And Kurt, I think we talked extensively about when you just keep saying why. Well, we're building this for the reporting department. Why? The reporting department needs it for sales. Why? And then you finally get to that end point, and people are like, well, we don't really.
If someone hasn't pushed you out the door by that point of
Yes,
I mean, I want to chime in on a couple of things. So the whole diet and fitness thing. What's interesting, Ryan, what you were saying is that usually at the end, if you've crashed diet and you get to a place, when you come out of that, your body is worse.
Yeah.
And it's harder to recover. And I think that's actually post-pandemic with some organizations I've been talking to, what I see. They've got a lot of different things coming in. They're very confused, much like everybody's confused about, should I be vegan? Should I be heavy protein, eat carnivore? Like there's all that stuff that's out. And it's the same thing, I think, for organizations. Years ago, so someone said, you know what, Trish, you need to give me something. Like, what would we know? And I appreciate that, right? There's information. And so we were looking, and I think Kurt, you and I talked about this years ago, but so we worked with this consultant at a company, and we're looking like, okay, well, so what's turnover like? When you have someone leave a team, are people eager to try to learn more about this agile way of work? Are they eager to join those type of teams? What does it look like? You can look at what's going on with the product backlog. You can look at all these other things, but when you look at it, ultimately, that really doesn't tell you if your transformation is success. There's some information in there. And I remember Ken Schwaber really pushing hard on this notion of getting some sort of monetary value assigned to it because he wants it to be seen as valuable and as an asset. So that's ultimately what we would look at. The things along the way, they're information, but
Well, there's one thing that's interesting about when people ask the question about how do we measure the success of our agile transformation, and so I flip it back to that thing that we were just talking about. Ask, why do you want to transform? What are you trying to achieve? What are you not doing now? What are you not able to achieve now that you want to achieve? And keep asking why until you figure out what the real goal of transforming is, because you're not transforming to transform. You're not becoming agile just because. So, there's got to be something driving it. Now, what we often see is that what's driving it is sort of kind of in a sense, an intercompany peer pressure fad kind of thing. Like, somebody's gone to a conference and, everybody else is becoming agile. We have to become agile. And, that's an okay place to start, but really question, what are you not able to do now that you think you need to be able to do? Where are your customers unhappy? Where are you at a disadvantage competitively? And try to fashion goals around that. And then you can track your progress toward those goals. But there's a lot of silliness around agile transformation. Like, Todd, you mentioned people measuring number of teams that are, quote, agile, or, number of products, but none of those things are really meaningful. That they don't, you tell that to really a business person and they would be like, so what? But if you talk about, well, we've got these customers with this satisfaction gap and we've closed that gap in this way, and that's enabled us to gain market share. That's enabled us to, discover, needs that we didn't know existed before. Then those things become meaningful. So I think that asking why, when somebody says, well, we're doing an agile transformation, why? And keep asking until you get at the real reason. And sometimes there's a painful silence, like Todd said. You said, sort of the ear flicking. because you ask why, and there's a painful silence because people well, we actually don't know why we're doing it. Well, there is some reason, you just maybe can't articulate it yet, and getting to that I think is important, because otherwise this transformation is just going to be rudderless. You'll have a bunch of meaningless statistics about number of teams and number of sprints and number of I just thought of a funny thing. How in factories they have number of days since the last accident or number of hours since the last accident, and
back to zero.
You could do something silly as say number of days since somebody mentioned the word stand up.
Yeah. I mean, Kurt, the measures certainly get weird. The diet or weight loss analogy. Todd's absolutely right. The weight is a lagging thing, but everybody focuses on it. You get your blood work done, and shows that your kidneys aren't functioning, your cholesterol is too high, and your body, like Trish was saying, yeah, your weight's down, but your body's a mess. And a lot of these organizations end up in the same way. It's an odd thing. It also kind of ties into this other question that Jackie asked. How do we get leadership to care about how the Agile is working? Well, I think Kurt nailed it. It's talking about things in terms and measures that actually make sense and that the business cares about. They don't care about the number of teams transformed or adopting Scrum. They don't care about the number of times the word daily stand-up was said. But if you can talk about revenue recognition, ROI, satisfaction gaps, well, then suddenly you've got someone's attention outside of your Scrum bubble,
And it's a pain or pleasure thing, right?
Tell me more.
Well, Jesus, that came out wrong. I mean, when you think about just how you promote ideas or how you have discussions, right? So what you display, what you show, that has to be relevant. And it's either got to be, what did I say? Solving a problem or, making something better. And that's
Yep.
how, when you're talking about leadership, you really have to think about, it's sales, right? You have to think about at what level, what are they thinking about? What are their concerns? How does this relevant to them? And just like you said, Ryan, it's like, they're not going to say, hey, we've been really good about having daily scrums this whole sprint, that's not the thing. So
the other thing about the goals is that a lot of organizations, their goals start off at a place where they're say, well, we want to go faster. We want to deliver faster. Or they say, we want to become more efficient. And I would say as starting points, those aren't completely off. Having a faster delivery cycle and a faster ability to learn is important, but that's not really the reason why you're doing this. Or if it is the reason you're doing it, it presumes that everything that you're doing is valuable and that every single idea that you do hits the mark, and you just need to do that faster. That's usually not the case with most organizations. So that's why we have these 4 KVAs in EBM, the key value areas. So being efficient addresses ability to innovate. Going faster basically is focused on time to market. But we have these things called current value and unrealized value to measure, is what you're doing valuable? And if what you're doing is valuable, you're simply producing waste faster and more efficiently. And so that's one of the reasons why we often in talks and things, we talk about having a balanced view between those 4 key value areas, because you can't look at just one and get a complete picture. Just like with the dieting example, you can't look at just weight and get a complete picture of the person's health or well-being. You have to look at a number of different factors.
And also that narrative, right? So weight, just to hone in on that, 5 pounds of fat and 5 pounds of muscle looks very different.
So a LinkedIn user threw in some good questions in addition to why, what are you not able to do now that you need to be able to do? Why? I think it's exactly along the lines of what we're talking about, trying to get people to think about goals instead of just the metrics. Good friend of ours, Kevin, is out there. Great book. I need to read it again this weekend. I mean, you can read another book too, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
But we appreciate the support. It's great to see you there, Kevin. Janet's dropping, but she can't wait to read the book as well. So Janet, thanks for grabbing the book. Thanks for being here. It's always great to see you as well. We hope you're doing awesome, that you have a great weekend, and appreciate the discussion on transformations. And we have 100% agreement. No one's disagreeing with us, which is good, I guess. But yeah, focus on process without the outcomes probably isn't going to be useful. I had a question for Trish and Kurt, if that's all right. I might put you on the spot a little bit. You can always pass if you want, but it seems like a lot of new theory got laid out in the EBM book. So I think some definite new ground got looked at, some new ideas discovered. Can you definitively say like there will be an update to the EBM guide kind of within the next 12 to 18 months, triggered from some of the new things discovered by writing the book?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's what happens is that when you have to explain something, you're forced to really try to simplify it down to the most elemental terms. There's a saying that if you can't explain a concept to an 8-year-old, you don't actually understand it yourself. And not that any of our audience are 8-year-olds, although that might be really interesting, really bright kids. But the thing is, when you have to explain it, or when you are walking through these scenarios, you realize, oh wait, there's a better way to talk about that, or there are other things that we need to say in addition to those things. So you're right. The process of doing the book was uncovered some areas that we can improve.
I didn't mean it critically. No,
but it's a good thing. If we didn't, I would be really surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. And probably before 12 to 18 months too, just because there's just so much that we've learned. Like one of the things about writing, especially 2 books at the same time, is that you have to be my muscle worked quicker at laying out ideas and kind of thinking them through and being able to flesh through them. So I'm curious for you all, like personally for me, after writing the books, I'm like, I don't want to read or write at all, anything. But then it's like, you kind of like, you want to write. So I don't know, Todd, you've been talking about like wanting to write more. Are you guys keen? Are you writing? What are you doing with that little sport?
Right now, I'm actually like kind of a little possessed with writing. Like I just feel like I want to take. I felt like I wanted a break from it. I'm not writing a book. That's not happening at the moment. But I feel like I've kind of gotten the urge to write more blog articles, think through things with writing rather than really any other channel. So I feel kind of inspired with that right now. Not that I have anything in particular, but where that was kind of shut off for a little bit, I feel like I felt the urge to write recently.
That's good, because before the book, you told me you couldn't read. So
there's an idea that's popped in my head. I recently read a book on sprint goals. I've been looking at other evidence-based books. Just now that we're done with our book, I wanted to, because I really didn't want to read these beforehand and get caught in the trap of stealing someone's idea. And as I've read these, I've noticed there's a very significant gap in the metrics measurement kind of space, and I can't get it out of my head, and I've irritated Todd enough with it. So I think I'm just going to sit down and write the 50 pages that I want to write, and maybe send it to all of you and just say, is this anything? And so yeah, I'm kind of back engaged in it. But for a good, it was weird timing for me writing the book. I had just finished a master's degree program where I was writing constantly. So 20, 30, 40, 50 page papers. And then, so I haven't been able to read until recently very much at all. Like I was reading thousands of pages every 8 weeks for a course, and then writing papers, and then looking at this book. And so I burned out on that quickly, but I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I'm kind of back into reading, and I've got to get some ideas out. And otherwise, Todd, I think, is going to punch me the next time we see each other.
And Kurt, you and I are constantly creating content for scrum.org in different formats. But
Yeah,
you're working on some side projects too?
Yeah, I have a side project with a former colleague, and we've written a series of articles on InfoQ on software architecture, and it's interesting, it's fun, it explores a different aspect of empiricism, and there's an interesting set of challenges there. So it's sort of harkening. I started off in my career as a software developer. So and I spent a lot of time either developing software, managing software development, or product development and things like that. And so it's been a fun side thing, and it gives me ideas back on back in terms of Scrum as well. And one of the interesting things about especially in software, about architecture, but it applies to physical products and other even services, is that it's really difficult, if not impossible, to effectively iterate or to deliver frequent increments if you don't have a solid foundation on which you're basing your latest increment. And so that gets expressed in a bunch of different ways, but we've kind of been exploring things related to that topic and thinking about every single product increment as a new minimum viable product, new incremental minimum viable product. And then associated with that, there's an incremental minimum viable architecture that supports that minimum viable product. And so the latest article that we're working on writing is on the how do you decide what's minimum, both on the product and the architecture side? And that's actually a challenging question. So anyway, I'm having fun with that. But in addition, yes, we're doing lots of things around competencies and learning paths and other things at scrum.org that has been fun to try to. We have a lot of content out there, but it's not always the most consumable. And so we've been trying to think about how do people learn, what are the right sized chunks of, in a sense, knowledge to give people, and how do we, in a sense, package it up so that they can get what they need when they want it and not have to wade through tons and tons of articles, blogs, guides, etc. So that's been fun too.
Very good. We had a nice comment from a LinkedIn user. Book sounds well-rounded. It sounds like a well-rounded resource tool that can be useful to any thought leader. We'll definitely buy. Nice.
Thank you.
Very nice. Well, yeah, I think that's a good kind of discussion. Any other thoughts or questions from all of you? It was a fun process. I mean, I'd give it 5 stars, would recommend. But all right, maybe 4.5.
I would say writing a book is not. Everyone thinks it's hard, and it's actually harder than you think it is. And
Kurt, you've written a lot of books, so we were very lucky to have you.
I've written a lot of books, and I've edited a lot of books, and I've reviewed. During the writing process, I provided comments to friends and people writing books. But what I would say to people is that having to write your ideas down is a really great exercise, whether it's simply, even if you're just presenting your ideas to some team members, but thinking it through, writing it out, it's an intellectual process that gets you to think about, okay, how do I explain this? What's the best way to explain this? How can I be concise with the ideas and impactful? And so I think it's a good intellectual exercise, and that's what makes it hard, because most of us, if you simply recorded what we say and then transcribed it and read it, you would realize there are lots of holes in that are filled in by facial expressions, gestures, body language, interactive discussion with people. But when you actually have to sit down and write it without all of those other communication aids, it's really difficult. But I encourage people to do it because I think it's a really important way of developing your thought processes and your reasoning skills. And then the key to that is really understanding your reader, understanding where they're coming from, what they need to know, what they're looking to achieve, and then figuring out how do you give that to them in the most sort of time respectful way possible. And again, that's hard, but it's also a good exercise because I think for me, having helped a lot of people write better, and also having been the recipient of help. I had a couple of really good mentors over the years who helped me improve my writing, and I think that it's, to me, it's a rewarding process because you can feel your mind developing as you're improving, and it's one of the few things where I think if you work at it, you can really see the improvement over time. Anyway, that's sort of my plug that I think everybody, blogging is a good thing, but even if it's just preparing for a discussion with your team members, it's still a good thing.
I want to test something, Kurt. So I just saw something, and of course, like I don't know who's out there, but if it's not interesting for you, too bad. So there was something that I saw about, so executives were looking pre-pandemic and talking about further degrees. And they would say that the skill and the degree that they were looking for in people was engineering. Why? Because engineers are very logical thinkers. They can get up some ideas that can get patented. We can sell them. We can make money. And now what they're saying is we're really looking for people who are more in the arts because of the way people consume on social media. How can we create the content? How can who are these people who can create content, write, shoot videos, whatever, and who are the people who can edit it down so that it's very consumable, 59 seconds, 39 seconds, 19 seconds, and they know exactly what those sound bites be. So it's interesting to see how that desire or that demand has changed in terms of a skill set. And actually what's nice is that, we kind of, when you have a blend of those skills, it's very interesting, but that was the thing about thinking about content and getting it out there correctly.
Yeah, I think that's true. You see, there's there's kind of a flip-flopping back and forth over probably a 5 to 10 year period about people with, let's say, more liberal arts degrees will be in demand during one phase of that cycle, and then then there's a flip to more STEM oriented. And you hit the nail on the head right toward the end of what you were saying there about people with both. They're not mutually exclusive. Writing is just thought, and being able to think clearly is really valuable, whether you're in engineering or whether you're in mathematics or whether you're in product development or in marketing or anything. And so I think that what's happened in the educational system is that there's been maybe an over rotation to STEM, but if it includes writing, because scientists have to write up reports and articles and papers and things like that for journals. They have to go to speak at conferences. So I think that fundamental communication skills is always going to be in demand. And I think that what you're saying, Trish, is that executives realize that they may be over rotated on that a little bit, and that they need people who can write clearly, think clearly, communicate clearly, and so yeah, I think I think everyone should be able to communicate clearly, because otherwise you can't get your ideas across, you can't work with other people, and you have difficulty in a lot of cases. You have difficulty even forming your own ideas about what you believe and what you think and what your approaches are. So anyway, we've drifted into sort of communication theory here.
Well, but it's a good topic. It's one that I've got a stack of books I've been working through on how. One of them's literally called How to Think. Another one I've been doing like a self-paced course on logic, just understanding the ancient rhetoric versus logic and how all that works out. I'm a big fan of Cal Newport. Been working through deep work by him, just really trying to figure out, because I mean, I don't know about all of you, but I can definitely drift into this area of lazy thinking where it's like, I believe this is true, or this is what but the thoughts are incomplete, and really trying to be more, just from a thinking perspective, how am I processing information? And then I think that's a good like precursor to writing decently. I think it's learning how to think. I've asked my kids, like, do your teachers ever talk to you about processing information, or logical thinking, or the scientific method, or why you believe what you believe? And like, nope, they have us memorize our stuff and do our spelling words, and so now my kids hate me because they're working through a logic kind of idea, because I don't think it's taught anymore. I don't think some of those, the classical liberal, and I'm using liberal in the classical sense, education has kind of drifted out of the vision of our school systems.
Yeah, and it's so I think it's important. I think that and reading broadly helps. I mean, the more you read of good authors,
yeah,
the more you absorb not only their ideas but their writing styles, which means their way of thinking and reasoning through things. And so I view choosing a book to read as the choice decision is one of the most important that you'll make, because if you choose to read junk, your brain will be junk. If you choose to read,
I disagree.
Really, well, that's fine.
I'll say this why. So there's fiction, nonfiction, right? Technically, we're reading nonfiction, but the ability to tell a story, comes from reading fiction, to me.
But you still
which sometimes you classify as junk, Kurt, because I know you very well.
No, well, no, I think a well-written story that has an interesting characters, interesting arc, interesting storyline is really difficult to do, and it's really important. So I don't classify all fiction as junk, but some fiction is junk, but not a lot of nonfiction is junk too.
Some nonfiction is so junk, it's fiction.
That's good point. Can we quote you on that?
Yep, put it right up.
Yeah.
Some would have you believe you can do twice the work in half the time. I don't know.
If you substitute twice the waste in half the time, yeah.
But it is an interesting, like, to circle this back into, being able to be a good storyteller might be a good middle ground if you don't want to write a book. But, learning the craft of telling a good narrative, especially in the workplace, especially for engineers, could be a great skill set. You just have to be careful, because if you get too good at it, they'll pull you up into management. So watch that.
Yeah, So, but one thing that will never be a bad thing is really having customer empathy and understanding what customers are trying to achieve, and where they are today and where they want to be. And even if you're doing something in let's say electrical engineering and designing electronic hardware and things like that, understanding how people are going to use that thing is going to be really important. And having and in a sense, that's forming, there's a technique in user experience modeling called personas, and having, in a sense, a story in your head about how somebody who's going to use what you're building and how they're going to use it is actually really important from a product development perspective. It's maybe the most important thing that you can have. And so that's just storytelling in a way, distilling down who your characters are, and others who the personas are, and what they lack, and maybe what their lives are like, and how distracted they are. They've got the kids, making noise in the background, and they're trying to do something, and that all helps, regardless of what you're doing.
Well, and Jackie would agree about the kid comment. Thanks for being here, Jackie. Yeah, those kids, they kind of show you the need for those fundamentals time and time again. Let's see. We have a request. Ryan and Todd had a session for recommending books. We did some videos where we recommended books on the channel, but it's been a while. Do we have any? So that's interesting. Maybe we'll wrap up with this. Any book suggestions? And it doesn't have. I hope they're not agile books, but any books like that impacted your career. Any books that you think that everybody should read. Any books that have had a foundational impact on life, business, anything like that.
I've got a good book story. Several years ago, I was on a plane reading The Hunger Games, and I had like a mom and her like 12-year-old daughter sitting next to me, and the daughter was like, "Where are you at in the book?" And then we discussed the entire book for a trip across the country. I like any kind of good book. Those are actually really well written books.
Yeah.
My latest book that I'm reading right now. Well, I wrote a post about this on our website. This I thought was a really good book by Dave Grohl, the storyteller, drummer from Nirvana and founder of the Foo Fighters. This is actually a really good book too. That's leading me on this. The bassist for Red Hot Chili Peppers, Flea, Acid for Children. That's what I'm reading right now. So non-professional stuff.
The one I'm working through right now is called Only Joking by Jimmy Carr. So Jimmy Carr is one of the biggest comedians in the UK. But it's filthy. I shouldn't be listening to it, but I love sick one-liners, and he's great at it. And he, along with Lucy Greaves, break down why people need to laugh and why jokes cause laughter, and how phrases and words, with just different sounds can make people laugh more. And so I'm a big fan of language, and I just find this stuff endlessly interesting. And Jimmy Carr is very funny, and so it's kind of an academic book, but it's a funny academic book. But it's one of those language things that I really like. Then I think a lot of people on the podcast also know I just, my master's degree is in theology, so I always have some form of book like that open as well. But the other one that has really caught my attention, and Todd probably has already read this. We haven't talked about this, so I could be wrong, but the Wim Hof method. I'm really into the ice baths and the proper breathing. These are two things that have helped me a lot lately, and Wim Hof is an expert. I think, Todd, do I have that right? He's one of the experts in these things.
I don't know if he can be an expert in it, but he's definitely talking about it a lot.
So my book stack is eclectic. It's got all sorts of craziness in it.
Kurt, do you have some? I'm just looking through my list that I have.
I have a long list of really things not related at all to software, business, or maybe even current life. But I tend to read a lot of what you might loosely call sort of classic history and philosophy. I think philosophically, my leanings tend toward Hume and Montaigne. But I'll give a plug for a podcast series that I find every single thing they talk about interesting, and it ranges from philosophy to history to religion to science to really just about everything. And it's Melvin Bragg's podcast on BBC Radio 4 called In Our Time, and you can go on, and there are thousands of podcasts going back probably 20 plus years. But I find it really interesting because what they do is they get usually 3 experts in Melbourne moderating, and they'll have people talk, and it'll usually be really deep stuff like I'd have to look at what some of the recent ones were, but it ranges. It'll in one podcast they'll be talking about quantum physics, and then the next one they'll be talking about the role of the Tudor dynasty in medieval England and or Renaissance England. And so I just find that the exposure to all these different concepts and experts who just love what they do and love talking about it be really literally mind-opening. And so I find a lot of books that I read end up coming from that, because they'll talk about something and go, oh, I don't really know much about that. And then I'll get on a kick to learn a lot more about that particular subject. So I think that's, and it's completely different than any kind of professional stuff we encounter today, but yet it has, I think, great bearing on, because in a sense, human beings haven't really evolved in millions, hundreds of thousands of years, and so we're still the same virtual, the same kinds of beings that were living in the Middle Ages. We just have better technology.
On that note, can I plug some of my books? Just
yeah,
go ahead. A minute. So just on that note, what Kurt was saying, there was a book, I almost finished it, but I thought the topic was really important. So it's called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. And what that is, because we're in the business of questioning stuff, is it looks at the perspective of how we think history has happened. So we assumed that a lot of the tribal and nomadic people in the beginning, they're not as advanced as us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that story has been told by a certain group of intellectuals. So this is a deep dive into understanding how people actually organized, what are different than those cultures, why is it, our hunter and gatherers, was that the big thing that changed how we organize societies? And it's a big question mark on that. The other thing that Ken gave me the book a while back, and I would read a little bit of this every morning, was the Dalai Lama's cat. So very, very cute perspective on life. But then that got me over into, which I kept on reading a little bit in the morning, was Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And that was by the Holocaust survivor. And he doesn't talk about, what happened in the Holocaust and when he was at Auschwitz. That's been said a lot, but he talks about what kept him alive and what mindset that he had. So those are a couple different books. And then, of course, I have some other ones, but usually I'm looking at books that have different perspectives and how they voice those things. But the one that I talked about, the first one, is really interesting because it informs how we think about organizations and how we should be forming as societies.
Very cool. Maybe we'll do a podcast in the future about whether or not the middle-aged person was a fool or just didn't have tech. I think that would be a fun Kurt, we ought to do one of those BBC type of shows just on 4th century thinking and whether or not they were dolts. I tend to it's hard for me to read like Augustine or Anselm and then sit back and say there were no intellectuals before 1999. There were brilliant people. I think you're right. The tech wasn't there, but we could spawn that into another hour. So we'll have to be careful here.
Yeah. I mean, my view is that there have been great minds in every generation, and that most of their works don't survive, and pre-writing, none of it survived. It was just people talking, and so you only heard by reputation. But we fundamentally, as human beings, we haven't really changed, and the superficial circumstances have changed, but the way the brain works, not really, not in a very long time. But anyway, fascinating discussion. And, as always.
Well, we hope everybody enjoyed it. Stacked Java seems to be enjoying it, so that's good. Thanks for being here. A question did come in late, but we are out of time. Maybe we'll take a look at this at some other time. EBM and Kanban KMM, can they work together? That's going to be that'll be a different episode. I'm not sure what Kanban KMM is, but we'll figure that out and perhaps get an answer out in a future video. But Todd, Trish, and Kurt, thanks for doing this. Certainly had a blast writing the book with y'all. Hopefully everyone out there is buying the book. We'd like to see it do well. Let's actually secretly, I'd prefer it become the best, most selling book in the Scrum.org series. I think that would be a fun
It's
goal.
because of the ideas, not the money, guys. We should be very transparent. We don't care.
So,
We're not making.
That's the other thing most people probably have a misconception about. That's probably worth another episode too, but you do not get rich writing books.
And Scrum.org donates proceeds to charity.
Yep. A lot of it goes to, I think, Europe, which
Yep.
is a great organization. And yeah, so it's definitely not for the money. It's getting the ideas out there. I think we would all be pleased if the ideas spread wide and far, and that people actually started using some evidence for decision making. We would be thrilled. So thanks, everybody. We hope you enjoyed it. Leave your questions, comments, and ideas below. Like and subscribe, do all that stuff. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.